number one, is that one of the commissioners or is that?
That might be me. This is Phil.
Oh, okay.
I'm still having the same situation with some meetings where my tablet is not, you can see me through my tablet, but I have to call in for audio.
Should probably have that looked at.
I tried a while ago, but I think our internet expert got busy with some stuff.
Yeah. Well, you can bring it in to me someday on your way by and I'll take a stab at it.
Okay.
I know enough to be dangerous.
You're in good company. We all know it'd be dangerous. Enough to be dangerous.
All right, I think we're about ready, so we'll call this meeting to order. It's Monday, April 12th of 2021. This is the Plan Commission of the City of Stoughton. We do have a quorum, and the first item would be approval of the minutes from March 8th of 2021. Somebody like to make a motion to that effect?
I'll make that motion to approve them as submitted.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
And any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Next item is the council representative report. Alderperson Caravello, anything to report out?
Just a few things. At the March 9th council meeting, Ordinance 5 of 2021 and Resolution 25 of 2021 passed. And at the March 23rd council meeting, R31 of 2021 also passed.
All right, thank you. Staff reports.
Included in your packet is a summary of some projects that are ongoing, but the one that I wanted to really highlight is Kettle Park West Phase 2 is underway. They're starting to do some earthwork and we'll be extending Jackson Street and Oak Opening Drive to the north this year. So that's getting started as we speak.
All right.
All right. Any questions about the reports? All right, hearing none. Item number 5 is a request by Kyle Roush for approval of an extraterritorial land division to split the property into 2 parcels at 1478 Lake Eganza Road, town of Rutland. You want to introduce this to us, Rodney?
Sure. This is a split that would be occurring on the farther edges of our extraterritorial jurisdiction, which is 1.5 miles out, and it's actually well beyond our long-term growth plans. But it's to create an additional parcel for them to operate, as I understand, a business off of one of the parcels.
All right. And there were no staff concerns?
There are none.
All right. Any questions from commissioners?
The town and county have already approved it.
Thank you, Michael. Hearing no questions, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion to approve.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 And any opposed? None opposed, that motion carries. Number 6 is a request by Kurt Silberschmidt for a certified survey map approval to combine the parcels at 835 Devonshire Road.
This is a kind of an interesting situation. There was an outlot that was created when one of these plat areas was platted in the rear portion between lot 1 and the lot 105 of the 7th addition to Hillcrest. The owner has ownership of both Lot 1 and Outlot 1, but in order to really put in place some of the fencing and or sheds that they wanted to do out there, it really needed to be consolidated into be one common parcel. So that's the request, is to combine Lot 1 with Outlot 1, and all the easements would remain as currently platted.
Any initial questions from commissioners?
Is there any reason why that outlot was platted like that to begin with?
I don't know if there was an ownership issue back then, or if it was just, I can't say why it was done that way.
Okay,
Any other questions
like-
or comments? Oh, go ahead.
seems like they had plenty of room for their utility easement back there, so I don't know if that were it.
Yeah, the easement's
Curious.
contained actually in Outlot anyhow, so I don't think it was really anything related to utility easement access, but it might have just been a remnant parcel that might have been left over from one of the previous platted areas.
Okay, curious, but
Any other initial questions from commissioners? All right, I'd entertain a motion. We're looking for a recommendation to the council.
I'd move to send this to council to approve.
Is there a second?
second,
All right, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 7 is a request by KPW LLC for approval of the final plat of Outlet 1, Block 1, the Meadows addition. And it looks like this one's coming up on the screen. Who would like to start?
I can just give a quick recap. The commission and the council have already seen the preliminary plat for this. Recall, this larger parcel was not platted as part of the original platting, but was anticipated to be platted for residential development. They've subsequently submitted a preliminary plat with this configuration with the 6 single-family residential lots shown, and now it's come forward with the final plat meeting the conditions that were placed on the preliminary plat requirements.
All right, and I know I see Kevin Yeska from JSD is here if you have any questions for the developers. Any initial questions from commissioners? Anything you want to add, Kevin?
I would actually be speaking for the lot 4 item that's coming up here.
Okay,
So we should have other representation on the call.
Mr. Mayor, Jim Bricker here. I could answer questions on this particular subject.
oh, okay, all right. Do you have anything to add so far, Jim, or should we just open it up?
No, we had brought this before the Plan Commission previously, and there was no questions. This has always been planned as part of the second part of the development of Kettle Park West. And so it's pretty straightforward as Rodney presented.
All right. So I'd entertain a motion from commissioners. This one would be a recommendation to the council.
Well, I'll make a motion to recommend to the council to go ahead and approve it as submitted.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, any questions or thoughts or anything? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
aye,
Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Item number 8 is from Ford Development Group for the certified survey map for 2501 Jackson Street into 2 separate parcels. Rodney, you gonna introduce this one as well?
Yeah, sure. This has actually been talked about in concept in previous PD suggestions that you'll recall that this is essentially just north of the Walmart site. And along the Kettle Parkway on the east side of the property line. And on the north side, you have the Aldi's on lot 2, and on lot 8, you actually have the hotel. So what they're proposing to do is split this lot into 2 parcels. You'll see the subsequent submittal related to part of this lot 4 being considered by the commission as a later agenda item tonight. And Kevin Yeska may have some insight, or Jim Bricker could, if there's anything additional that we need to discuss related to the CSM here as well.
No further comments on mine. Thanks, Rodney.
Sure.
Any initial questions or thoughts from commissioners?
I had one.
Go ahead, Alderperson Maskey.
I see that you have in lot 2, the wetland buffer is into lot 2 by what, 45 feet? How are you gonna address that in the future?
Currently, there isn't a development proposal planned for the buffer of lot 2 at this point.
Is that prudent?
Was there a follow-up, Tom?
Yes, is that prudent? I mean, I'm assuming these are gonna be commercial lots?
Correct. So our group is working with Florida Development Group. So at the moment, or tonight, really what we're going for is approval of a site plan on lot 1. Lot 2 and lot 3 to the west are in their concept development phases. So Forward and ourselves, as well as an architectural group, are working on the concept plan for that. And we recognize the wetland setback is a challenge for development on both lot 3 and then this remnant lot 2. We're aware, working around them at the moment. So
the understanding is you're doing the split, but you're focusing on lot 1 at this point?
correct.
Okay, any other questions from commissioners?
Mayor, this is Todd.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's my recollection that in the plans that we've seen up to this point, that these lots here have always been commercial. They're not switching from mixed use to residential to commercial. They've always been slotted like this. It's just we're splitting the lot now.
Currently, the zoning change is not before us. You're correct. These were commercially zoned, anticipated for commercial use.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, I would entertain a motion for a recommendation to the council.
I'll make that motion to accept the division in the 2 lots, lot 1 and 1, 2, to the council to go ahead and approve them.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right, and a second. Any final thoughts or questions? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 And any opposed? That motion carries. Item number 9 is a request by Forward Development Group for approval of a specific implementation plan for 2501 Jackson Street. Rodney?
I'll just give you a quick initial presentation, and the applicant can provide some insight. So this actually represents lot 1 of the CSM that you previously acted on, which is the eastern part of the parcel that was formerly lot number 4. Kettle Parkway frames the east edge of this particular parcel, Jackson Street on the north side. You'll note on the site plan that's on the screen at this point, they are devising a strategy for a drive-through use on the east end of the building. You'll see the stormwater management basin wrapped around by the one-way drive-through. The exit point was sharply turned to facilitate movement only southerly on Kettle Parkway. At least that's the intention. It's going to be marked and signed so that there isn't an intention of people to try to turn left onto Kettle Parkway from the drive-through area. You might recall there was an SIP that had been approved and acted on prior to this time. The site has changed some. They're looking at modifying it to a certain degree, and that's why they're before us tonight with some alterations. But the building has many similar characteristics of the formerly approved site. I think the stormwater management basin probably got a little larger than it was in the past. Some changes to dumpster enclosures, but that does have an orientation of the building front for entrances to the south as it was previously approved as well. That's just a quick and dirty. If the applicants would like to give a summary of their highlights, I think that would be appropriate as well, Mayor.
All right, anything for development group would like to add at this point? All right,
And actually, I was going to see if Brent with FDG, I see that he is on, and I think was just going to speak high level overview, project schedule,
Okay.
introduction.
You guys hear me now?
yep,
Okay, sorry. Hi, this is Brent Elliston with Ford Development Group, here to talk about KPW Lot 4. So what we have here is, as you said, Rodney, this has been before you, but the building has shrunk a little bit. We're down to about 8,200 square feet. We've got 3 tenant spaces proposed. 2 of those are leased up, and those are with a national paint retailer and a regional sub shop. And then the third space in the middle would be for an office tenant. We are just working through schematic drawings right now, which was part of the submittal. And are there any questions regarding the building or the site that we can answer?
Mayor, I've got a couple questions.
sure, go ahead, Todd.
So the first is, and I'm trying to got all the papers laid out, so I'm trying to get the different views that apply, but you guys probably answer quicker than I can probably figure this out on my own. It appears that on the north side of the building that there's a walk system that you've developed to be able to access the north end of those spaces, but and it also connects to the sidewalk. Is that correct, that we can access these businesses off of the parking area considering, you know, what the way we've approached the residential is to create front porches and to engage the sidewalk and to connect to the sidewalk and the pedestrians. This particular commercial development seems to kind of run counter to that.
Mayor,
Go ahead, Alder Mayeski.
I'm agreeing with Todd. Basically, they designed a building with the back of the building facing the street. Doesn't necessarily give it a really good look, unless you like an alley. Kind of disappointing.
And I guess I would ask the team, is there something you could do to help address that?
So we are addressing that with adding landscaping to that north face to help dress that up. And there is building articulation on that north face to break up that facade so it doesn't feel like it's a back of building per se.
So important for how we've discussed this development from a residential perspective to essentially connect that development to the public space, to the sidewalk, to really essentially activate the sidewalk by the orientation of the buildings, the proximity of the buildings to those sidewalks, all that kind of stuff. We're doing all that stuff in the residential neighborhood, but then we plop in a commercial building that essentially turns its back on the sidewalk.
It's word. You can plant as much vegetation in front of it as you want. It's still the back of a building. Does not present itself as being welcoming.
I'm going to agree with both Commissioners Mayeski and Barman on this one. It just doesn't look like a very pretty side of the building facing as you would be approaching it from the intersection, or even as you're approaching it southbound on 51. It would look more like it would be a warehouse rather than something that they would be willing to go into.
I'm actually, this is Phil. I'm actually also noticing something on the previous graphic that we were looking at. Didn't look to me as though there is sidewalk along Kettle Parkway.
There's sidewalks along the east side of Kettle Parkway. There is not, and it wasn't part of the development plan to have it on the west side.
Is that because people don't walk on the west side?
It was part of the overall GDP plan to have it on the west side. And I think it's shown here on this particular screen here.
Yeah, that's a great plan.
So while we're thinking about the orientation of the building, I have one other question. And this is a
Question also.
When we look at parking requirements and parking stalls, did I hear correctly that the building now is approximately 3,000 square feet in that general range, which according to our handouts here says the requirement would be for 12 parking stalls for the building. And we're not supposed to go over a certain percentage above that, but there's over almost 40 parking stalls within this particular development. And so unless I'm understanding things differently, there's a lot more than 12 stalls provided, even though only 12 stalls are required. And we're not supposed to go over, I'm looking for the percentage here. It's like 120% over that without cause. I think we need to talk about the amount of parking.
Building is 100 square feet, just to clarify.
Sorry, what?
8,200 square feet, 8,200.
All right.
So there's a detailed breakdown on the site plan for parking requirements. That'll be our C 1.0 sheet. Required by ordinance for this property, we have to have 37 parking stalls and we're providing 44. Just giving a little bit of flexibility there for a change in tenant, whatever it may be. But yeah, we're required to have 37 and we're slightly over that. I just wanted to note that.
You said
and then
8,200 square feet.
Correct.
So 8,200 square feet, and it's one parking stall per 300 square feet. That calculates out to 27 stalls.
It actually varies by the use. So if we're looking at retail as the end tenant, the Western tenant, that requires 12 stalls. The restaurant tenant or the sub shop would be 11 stalls. And then that middle tenant classified as office would be 12 required stalls. That's how we're getting to the requirement.
For you. Sorry, I'm trying to get to that screen.
And I think when we're done answering this, I think Alder Mayeski was next.
Thank you.
There's the table. Is there more discussion on the parking, Mayor?
Oh, I thought somebody was answering the question. Sorry. So it looks like there's 35 required and 42 proposed with 2 accessible. Alder Mayeski had the next question.
Yeah, I want to go back to the sidewalk, not being on the west side. That goes directly against a hard fought and sidewalk policy that the city and the city council just voted on last year. Please explain to me why we don't have a sidewalk there.
Kettle Parkway is not a city street. It's a private drive. I'm not saying that's justification. There's a distinction between the two.
Good thing to know for the future.
And Rodney, I don't know if it would help the discussion if you do have the general development plan available and we're able to, bring forward that latest master plan.
I don't know if I have it at my fingertips here.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah. So while he's looking for that, as this thing develops to the west, are there any plans on putting a crosswalk or a sidewalk across Jackson Street? Because when I look at a larger map, it seems like that's aligns better to where the hotel is than Kettle Parkway does. Because the hotel is kind of west of this proposed 3-unit. It's on the western edge of it.
Sure. So north of our property and northwest or northeast of this property, you obviously have the Kettle Parkway and Jackson Street crosswalk to get you across to the existing McFarland State Bank. And then right where it says Jackson Street, the T in street, that's a crosswalk to get you across Jackson to the Aldi's, the hotel. There is no crosswalk at the moment between, say, the southern end of our pond and Quick Trip. That was not an item we designed for in the general development plan that was approved. In 2000 and gosh, what was it? Originally approved in 2014 or 15, and then amended in 2017. I might have even got that first date wrong.
Yeah. So, and I guess the reason I bring that up is, I mean, you have a crosswalk there, but if you're trying to get into the building, you have to walk across the drive-through lane.
Sure.
That doesn't seem like a very reasonable approach to the building. It seems like it would be better if there was a crosswalk, closer to the hotel to get across, because then at least you could get around the building without going through the drive-through lane. And I don't know if that's something that can be designed for the future or not.
On the screen, Mayor, is the aerial of the current configuration. You'll recall there's actually a pedestrian island in the middle, near the eastern edge of their development proposal. So to have another pedestrian crossing mid-block of Jackson Street may not be the safest connection point.
Yeah, I just see people wanting to walk from the hotel to go grab a sub. And I don't want them to have to go down the sidewalk, across the crosswalk, and then go into an area where there's no sidewalk and cross the drive-through lane to get to it. And I think that's what I'm hearing from the other commissioners. If they would cross closer to the hotel, at least they could get around the building on the western edge here without going through a lane of traffic.
There is a sidewalk that runs north to south along the west edge of the building, but you would have to essentially do a U around the building in order to get to the front of the restaurant shop.
Okay.
But there is a sidewalk route that could get them there without crossing any travel lanes, except for
Yeah,
crossing.
so I think anything we could do to encourage that would be better than trying to cross that drive-through lane.
Here, we may be able to add a sidewalk from roughly that ramp to the east corner, the northeast corner of the building, to kind of cut that distance from them walking back. And on that corner with some revised plans from that sub shop as we work through the interior programming of that space.
I appreciate the consideration. I'd ask the commissioners, I'll start with Todd and then Tom, and Phil, what you think about that idea. Any thoughts, Todd?
Well, there's a couple things going on. I mean, yes, I think you've identified some opportunities to maybe improve the pedestrian connections to the hotel, which are important. And I think thinking about the crosswalk from the hotel to across Jackson to the property is important, but that still doesn't change the essential engagement or orientation of the building away from that whole Jackson Street commercial area. It just doesn't feel right to me. And again, I don't have a site plan solution yet, but it just seems like the building is not orientated in the same way we talked about all the residential orientation to engage the sidewalk.
All right, Alderperson Majewski, do you have any other thoughts?
I'm just agreeing with Commissioner Bardman. It's, you know, it's feeling forced, what's being proposed right now. Part of the problem is that the building is designed for one face and one direction only. It's designed, and it's designed for car use only, not really pedestrian thought out. And he needs to go back to the drawing board, to tell you the truth, and come up with another design that's a little bit more pedestrian friendly and a little more aesthetically pleasing for the entire building, instead of just one face.
Alderperson Caravello, anything you want to add?
I just generally agree with the two previous commissioners. Just seems a little disappointed in the. I understand the Kettle Parkway is a, you know, technically a private drive, and it does not have the sidewalk along it on the western side there. But also that yeah, the building seems not as human friendly as it could be.
All right, Alderperson Schumacher, you have any thoughts?
Oh, I concur with the other three commissioners about that. I don't like having it look sort of like a warehouse from the back. So I would like it to be a little bit more engaging and friendly to anybody that would be driving into this entire complex from either direction, either from the residential side of it or from 51.
All right, Commissioner Robinson, do you have anything?
I don't really have anything to add to that. But I concur with what's being said.
So I guess from here, we can either make a motion or we can postpone it if we feel that we've given them enough direction to bring something else back. Do you guys have any questions for us?
Tim, I have one question. Brad Koenig from Sketchworks Architecture. I can understand the comments on the being more pedestrian friendly, and I think the attempt, you know, most tenants are single-sided, and so there's a balance there to reach between what is really the front door, especially in this particular scenario for this lot. And so we can definitely add some articulation to the front, and maybe even possibly a little bit more glass for transparency. But ultimately, you know, from a tenant standpoint, to have dual entries, one on the front street facing and then one on the parking lot, a difficult situation that most tenants, you know, from a personnel standpoint, they just can't manage. So I guess the question would be is, you know, I think the parking to the south is in line with kind of what the proposal and what the current existing condition is. The question, I guess, is, are we looking to force tenants to have a dual entry, or is it just more better articulation on the street front to give an idea of access point there, and maybe a little bit more interest in the building itself to be maybe more like the south side?
I'll start with Commissioner Barman. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. Again, I don't want to fool the customer or fake them out, in the sense that I don't want them to look at the north side of the building and think, because the way it's designed, that they can go in that way and have them cross over the street and walk along that sidewalk and then find out, oh, it's employee only. Because I don't think that's what we're looking for. We're not just trying to make it look like it engages the sidewalk. I'd really rather have it engage the neighborhood and the sidewalk differently. And I understand if you lay it out so that the parking is to the south, then that's the orientation of the building. And again, for me to redesign the whole site on the fly during this meeting, it's hard for me to say, well, what would it look like if the parking wasn't on the south side? If we put the parking on the east or the west side, could we orient the building in such a way that you engage pedestrians in the neighborhood better? And I can't do that on the fly. I think it's worth, from a site plan perspective and a concept perspective, to at least entertain the idea of not being tied to the parking on the south side. And seeing if we can come up with an orientation of the building. I do appreciate the fact that from a retail perspective, being able to control 2 ingress and egress points is a challenge just for employees and registers and shoplifting and everything else. So it's more, can't we have the primary face be somehow more engaged with the neighborhood?
Anybody else have anything they want to add?
This is Commissioner Majewski, and I'm in total agreement with that last statement. Fortunately, this building hasn't been built yet, and you can still spin it, you can still reorientate it, and we're giving you some direction. Hopefully you'll come back with something that's a little better designed for the neighborhood that's going to be there.
Anybody else? Okay, so developers, I guess, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner.
It sounds like, addressing the front to the north with parking between it and the street is a preferred method of engaging the neighborhood and the street. So you're gonna
That's
have
kind of what I'm hearing. It'd be one thing if it was facing the highway where nobody's gonna cross, but since it's part of the neighborhood, there's a hotel, there's guests that are at assisted living that'll want to cross over another development that's gonna occur. That's kind of what I'm hearing.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily just assume that we'd have to put the parking on the north side of the building, because then that creates a barrier between the building and the sidewalk. To me, it might be more of an orientation where the parking is on the west or the east. And then the one end of the building actually is much closer to the sidewalk along Jackson. And then people who are on Jackson on that sidewalk can more directly connect to the face of the building that is considered the front. I'm not saying to set it back like all these, where you have a big sea of parking in front of it. I wasn't on the commission when all these went in, so I mean, you can say, well, all these went in that way, but I wasn't on the commission. And so it just seems like it's worth looking at those other kinds of orientation.
All right, and then I would just ask the developers, as far as your schedule, I mean, obviously you want to get this thing approved, but I mean, what does your commitments look like?
We'll check the lease commitments, but they are approaching, early next year. So we would need to turn this around very, very quickly. So.
Okay.
I guess
Well,
a question or more of a statement or comment, Mr. Mayor, Rodney, how is part of this project was approved in 2015 with the same building change. GDP master plan calls for this building to be on this into the east. So to put the building on the low end of the site, so that backwards orientation access points are already in line. We have a CSN that's following this orientation. I'd really strongly, I'd just look for our architectural team to try to, solve this building and give it a face and come back with that, rather than a complete redesign and re-engineering of something that's already been approved. I just wanted to make that comment because, you know, the timing of this would drastically change things, and I just don't want to start spinning our wheels with another application that maybe it's not the best way. You know, we come back in a month or two from now and it's still not agreed upon. And we're bringing on a really great architectural group that, you know, their focus is commercial design. They've done a lot of projects like this, and I'm sure Brad's already has ideas in his head. So, you know, we'd love to work with staff to make sure they're comfortable before coming back, before we, go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, we'll be more than happy to meet you as staff and, you know, before you get too deep into it, if that's what you like to do.
We'd appreciate that.
Sure.
Well, I'll just toss out one other idea. I mean, if you're going to tell us that the building has to sit in this particular location because something that's already been approved, what I'd want to see as a commissioner, a current commissioner, I want to see where that's already been approved, that the building is allowed to be in this particular location, because that's part of what we do when we approve site plans. But if that's the case, we could also, as commissioners, say that the entrances to those commercial spaces have to be off Jackson, which then would require that the people who park in your lot would have to walk along that sidewalk on the west side of the building all the way back to the other side to come in the front. And I'm sure you might not necessarily be excited about that either.
Sure.
So,
yeah, no, I recognize that. And I think it's looking back at the general development plan, because I also recognize that the approval in 15 or 16 it's void at this point. So, I think our group just needs to go back to the GDP and see what was approved there, both architecturally, from a site access standpoint, landscaping, everything, to make sure we're meeting the needs here of Kettle Park West. I think there were a lot of great ideas thrown out today, and I fully recognize, inline retail like this is tough. It wants to have one face, and let's see what we can do to go back.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we all want something that's going to be successful and we can all, be proud of. So I hope, we don't want you to take this up personally. We just want to make sure that, we fully vet it out before we make the commitment. I think that's what I'm hearing. Seems like constructive feedback.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Anything else? Otherwise, we'll go on to the next agenda item. I don't know if there's a need to vote on anything. All right, hearing none, we'll go on to item number 10. That'll be a request by Bob Dvorak for a plan development concept plan review for the 51 West development. And who'd like to lead this off?
I'll just give a quick little synopsis. Before really the process for the rezoning. This is the concept plan submittal aspect of a plan development rezoning process. And I think it highlights some of the refinements that have been talked about in various levels of discussion as part of the overall concept plan. But the MSA development team and the owner are online as well to help carry it through some of those items.
Thank you,
All right.
Ronnie. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. If you want to speak on behalf of the team, go ahead, Steve.
Sure. Thanks, Mayor. So I'm Steve Tromlett. I'm an urban designer working on this project. As noted by Ronnie, there has been changes, and it was probably more than a year ago since you've seen this. But generally, it's a mixed residential neighborhood, kind of split by 51. It's over 70 acres. If we look on the east side, from the last time you've seen it, the changes is potential an interim roadway at the intersection of Rutland Dunn Town Line Road to create that east leg connection. We do not have enough space to do the full connection there because lands to the north are under Linrood's neighborhood plan, and you'll see the line work showing the road that was in that neighborhood plan. So this would just provide some access at this point with the intention of either through 51 reconstruction, or with development to the north, then the full right-of-way will be achieved. Part of this move is also to close Velcom Way between Nygaard, which is the north-south street, and US 51. There's been discussion about the visibility of that, and we've talked to DOT, and they had strong interest in closing Velcom Way in that location, and open to the discussion of the interim roadway, depending on what the TIA, which we're working on, will show for that it could function interimly until there is the reconstruct. But there you see lot 18 shows a multifamily complex, a large park that includes stormwater and trail system, and then duplex lots on the south side of Velcom Way. On the west side, since last time, there's no longer a road connecting to 51. Dvorak Drive is labeled on the south end that goes east-west. No longer goes beyond Oak Opening. In discussions with DOT, there is a deed for one access point, but for a road connection, they weren't open to that discussion as much. So you're seeing primarily lot 17 and 18 on the east side of Oak Opening as commercial, with all access coming from Oak Opening, which is the north-south street that runs there. And then as you go west of Oak Opening, it's basically a mix of residential, from higher density in the brown you see there, to orange being medium density. And then there's single family lots along the south side of Dvorak Drive, kind of next to other single family that's to the south. This is in planned mixed use, which is intended to have higher density, but we also like to plan for healthy neighborhoods where there's a mix of unit types, and that melds well with the existing development. And so you're seeing kind of a smattering of single family to side-by-side condos on the west side, fourplexes up to larger multifamily. So part of this process is to look at planned development for everything that is basically north of Dvorak Drive on the west side. It excludes a single family. And then on the east side of 51, lot 18 is also. So because there's multiple buildings, and because we're also requesting higher density on lot 5 on the west side and lot 18 on the east side, to kind of balance out the fact that we're having some lower densities. And then in the same case, we're asking for some reduction in rear setbacks for lots 1 through 6 and lot 18. And they take back now lot 18. So all the ones on the west side there, with the intent that you see, most of those actually are abutting open space, with the outlots it's 1, 2, and 3. So they're not really backing up onto another property. That reduction in rear setback allows for the density we're looking to provide all the function in a layout. And then we'll also include design standards that'll help for compatibility with adjacent uses. So that would be obviously coming for you, hopefully next month to show a little bit more of how we're going to deal with whether it is back-to-back lot 5 and 6, where there's rear setbacks. So we're looking for a reduction of between 10 and 15 feet in general. And the densities we're talking about is around 30 units per acre in those 2 lots around that versus 24, which is under conventional. Same story on general road layout is we're making connections to the west. We are showing a trail system that's connecting to existing and planning for future connection to the north. Through the Lenru property on the east and through other lands that Bob DeVark owns on the west side. And we've had discussions even with DOT about, is there going to be potential tunnel connection or some other connection, and that's something that's going to be discussed as you move forward for reconstruction of 51. So again, we're looking for some feedback as we work towards rezone application and general development plan that will hopefully come for you in May, at the same time that we have also submitted our preliminary plat, which will be coming for you in May as well.
All right, thank you. We'll start with the commissioners. Why don't we go in reverse order?
Steve, if you guys were planning on this to 51 and routing it to that interim road,
That first phase. So the closure would be happening at this.
I'm assuming, right?
That is correct.
Really important to some people is the that are currently there. So is there sense or Dunkirk has
With town chairperson and Don from a public safety, I think they would support. I know.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you. The action, putting the temporary access tonight. And the last meeting we had approximately 2 weeks ago with the DOT, they thought that it was a good idea to align that temporary road up with Rutland Dunn. Because they thought in the future, even that corridor gets redone, that would be one of the best avenues for safety along that whole corridor.
And then I would add, as far as the neighbors, and you might recall, Phil, as we were going through Park and Rec, some of the things that we tried to do is to create buffers using the park, the stormwater and the trail system to really help the people that are in the township feel like they're not losing, their privacy and some of the things that they enjoy there. And, I know Bobby probably had some conversations with them about that as well.
Yes, I have. I've had multiple conversations with 4 or 5 of the owners back there. In fact, one called me here last week, asked me how it was going, and they're very pleased with the layout of the parks, the trail system, and the stormwater management. So I've heard nothing negative, to be 100% honest with you, as far as anybody against these improvements going forward from that area.
Does that answer your questions, Phil?
It does on that. Thank you very much. I'm on the I think it's less, my next question is less of concern, if I heard correctly, on the east section, or maybe it applies there as well as it does on the west section of the development across 51, but the deviation from the setbacks or changing the setback limits, I'm curious about that. How that works or reasoning for that.
Sure.
The talk of that, yeah.
Sure. So lots 1 through 4, especially, which is the northwest section, plus the multifamily that's along Town Line Road, is one is to fit the development, but also with the fact that we were making sure to have these trail connections that are giving you that 40, 50 feet of corridor. So part of that is these lots with their setback that is reduced, which is typically done to create that separation from the adjacent property that's behind it. But in these cases, especially in those properties, they're backing up onto open space, either stormwater trail, park, or extended along the roadway there. 5 and 6 is the ones that are in the middle there to the east of Lot 3, which is the park. Those do have a little bit tighter with the setbacks reduction, and that's where the intention will be to definitely lay out in the general development plan design standards that will allow for those uses to be compatible with each other. The main reasoning again is to provide for the densities that were kind of desired in the comp plan for this area, with the intentions that other areas are a little bit reduced in density to kind of, again, give that balance of different unit types and to kind of make it smooth over to the uses that are lower density surrounding to the south there.
Can I just ask a clarification question?
Sure.
When we're talking setbacks, are we talking about front setbacks, rear setbacks, side setbacks, or all of the above?
Only asking for a reduced rear setback in these cases. So sides and front are remaining the same as conventional district.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, Phil?
No, I think that covers me for now. Thanks.
All right. Alderperson Majewski, you're next.
Thank you. I'm going back to when we originally looked at this and probably have the same comments that I had before. First of all, where's the connection between the east and the west for pedestrian path?
That is a potential planned connection outside of this development. It's connecting on the west side. Bob DeVork owns lands to the north of Town Line Road, and Linwood Neighborhood Plan shows additional extensions, and so the intent is to connect it through those lands to the north, and so it's not crossing in this segment.
And my understanding is, from talking to the DOT, that topography has something to do with that. Is that true?
I can't speak on that. I don't know if Bob can speak on his conversations with DOT.
Approximately 1,200 foot north of the Rutland Dunn intersection, as the grade goes down to the north, is where Jeff Behrens from the DOT suggested to put the pedestrian tunnel to tie both east and west together. And I think we showed that on a overall concept map some time ago when we originally approached planning.
And we have a open house with the DOT. Is that next week, Rodney?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a virtual one and then there's an in-person one at the SWAC. So we have an opportunity to follow up on that very point that you're making, Tom, because I think that is a critical point, not only that you've made and we've talked about, but even some of the residents have mentioned that as well.
Okay, and my next comment then is, much to the credit of Forward Development and their plan, they have a trail that runs along the face of the development along 51. I see absolutely zero pedestrian usage along the edges of 51. 50-foot setbacks, no trails.
I think Rodney could probably best answer that one.
Yeah, the Highway 51 corridor improvements, you might recall the city requested to have a 10-foot wide shared use path on either side of 51. We're calling it a sidewalk because of current state law about potential funding for that. But nonetheless, that was the city's direction as part of the DOT improvements that we're seeking, is to have that shared use, or at least a 10-foot wide pedestrian / bike path on either side.
So that is planned for this?
Not as
So you're
part of
telling
this
me-
development, as part of the corridor, the majors project, the DOT project, yes.
So that
Right.
should be on their plan when we have our open house.
On the DOT plan, correct.
Yep.
All right, so my next question then is, when I went back to my original comments that I had was the paved path that is along Oak Opening Drive and Dvorak Drive, which is basically a sidewalk, not a paved path. Would have been a lot easier and a lot less length if they would have put it between lot 15 and outlot 4. And therefore, you're reducing the amount of exposure to vehicle traffic.
So you're saying it would go between lot 15 and then south of lot 4?
You've got the paved path in outlot 3 running along the east edge. You're coming over between lot 15 and outlot 4. Why not just drop it between those two instead of running it all the way along Dvorak Drive, down Oak Opening Drive? Why not run it down between those lots and on the south side of outlot 4?
So we did look at that at one point. Part of the change was looking at that. It was meeting 200-year storm was required at this point now. But if you think about even just stormwater and the length of paved area, this is actually a reduction, because you would actually normally have sidewalks on those streets. You're adding additional paved section that would run around the ponding in outlot 4. And then there could be a debatable discussion about mid-block crossing being safer than at an intersection. I understand your point about what is that experience like along the street versus around a pond and green space. And I'm a family guy. I love to stay off the roads as much as possible. So I understand that. It was kind of a grading issue, a length issue in crossing, and so we went back to this original plan for that segment. And again, that segment is a very short segment of comparably for the entire system we were looking to put in here and provide access both north and west here into the south. But I understand your point.
All right, and now my next one is the shapes of your detention ponds. They're lovely squares. I believe we just changed our ordinance for how shapes of detention ponds need to be, and this will not cover that.
We've certainly discussed with the design team the interest of having curvilinear and/or peanut-type shapes and variations to the stormwater management facility areas. At one point, these were described to be illustrations, but I don't know if they've refined their grading plan at this point to reflect the perimeter of the pond area.
Should be shown for your open house.
Well, I think the open house is the DOT's open house. And what we're doing tonight is getting a feedback. So hopefully they can still incorporate that into their plan before they bring it back. And I would say from the original beginning, they have done some modifications to the ponds based on input. I don't know how much more they can do. I guess I can't answer that part.
I just can't see it on this plan, don't say. So, and those are my initial thoughts.
All right, thanks. Yeah, you're the anchor here. You're the cleanup man.
All right. Well, I guess I just have one is a question. When we, as the commission, are providing feedback and potentially approval of a concept plan like this, what are we going to be held to when you look at something like Lot 17? Which, you know, in the past as a commission member, I've looked at Lot 17 and looked at this as the concept and said, okay, this is going to be big box commercial, but until we actually have a site plan, that I'm not necessarily approving this exact footprint of the building. But based on our conversation on the item agenda just before this, do we need to start giving feedback already on a night like tonight on a big box footprint on Lot 17 like we're seeing here, and how it's oriented toward the rest of the neighborhood and the pedestrian connections and everything else?
I guess my initial comment is this is kind of a placeholder, and it could be a multitude of things. And did you have something you want to say, Rodney?
I was just gonna suggest that this is not a GDP application like was referenced in the Kettle Park West situation. When the GDP application comes before us, there will be more specific discussion about that aspect of it. But certainly, I think there's time to provide input now and throughout the process. And if you have, I think should be shared with the group.
I think just anticipating how commission members and as representatives of the community, we're really looking at trying to ask. I think it's important for when we're looking at like these Lot 17, Lot 16, is to make the point already that we need to really think about how those building footprints speak to the neighborhood and how they connect to the neighborhood from a pedestrian perspective. Because it's clear that a lot of thought has been put into how they connect from a vehicular perspective, because the roads are shown, but I can't see the pedestrian connections laid out on this. And as a commission member, I would really want that to be fleshed out some more. Not only in particular between Lot 17 and 16 and the rest of the western neighborhood, but I think as an earlier commissioner had brought up, you know, the connection across US Highway 51 to Bell Coleman Way and the residences to the east. And I understand how with the roundabout just on the north end of the development here, that's an awful place to try to do pedestrian crossing, to try to cross the roundabout. But I would hate to have the closest pedestrian crossing be another 1,200 feet to the north. It would seem like there would be a potential for a pedestrian connection either where current Bell Coleman Way comes across to connect the eastern residential to the commercial on the west side, or else maybe a little bit further down to the north of the lumberyard and outlot in your outlot 5. And again, that's got to work with the DOT. But I really, as a commissioner, would like to see those building orientations and the pedestrian connections presented to us as part of a concept plan like this.
All right. So anybody else have any thoughts now that we've gone through the order once?
I actually do, if I could. It's funny that Commissioner Barman just mentioned that. As I was sitting here looking at this, I was thinking the same thing about potentially where Velcoman Way currently is and the distances between, bike ped access to this whole thing, and the distances just being so far apart, and considering that, the nearest signaled pedestrian crossing is all the way down at Jackson, and then there will be the roundabout at Roby. But if there was some way to make this more friendly and get pedestrians, look at something along 51, or maybe that, the underpass at where Velcoman Way currently is, instead of, and or maybe in addition to one farther north. But that just seems like it might be worthy. I don't know how difficult, but it might be worthy of some investigation.
All right. Anybody else have any thoughts?
One question.
Sure.
What happens to the right of way where Velcom Way was?
Generally, a vacated street section generally goes half to either adjacent property owner. But I don't know that that's been explored in this particular situation yet.
Or could it possibly be the entrance or pedestrian way for an underpass?
A possibility.
Yeah, we haven't discussed, so I like the idea. I don't know. I guess we have to see what the feasibility is on that.
I think those comments certainly would be helpful if you're making comments to the DOT about pedestrian. Their corridor study was supposed to have, one of their principal goals was ped and bike safety. Bringing up your thoughts about that area is certainly going to be helpful as well.
I have one more thing now that we're looking at Velcoman Way. Is there not a residence that accesses their house on Velcoman Way just off of 51? Isn't there a driveway there?
Yeah, I think the developer is in the process of acquiring that property, so I don't think the access is going to be an issue going forward.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. Anybody else have any thoughts? And how was that for feedback, Steve and Bob? Was that enough? Too much? You want more?
Can I follow up with a question or two just from the last conversation we just had?
Sure.
It's good feedback, and I definitely want to hear about opinions about, lot 17. Obviously, it's a big box, and if you actually look back to the previous concept, that building was turned with the face towards 51, which put the back to the neighborhood. And I think this even goes, I was on the call with the previous item, and this is actually more in line with that discussion of putting a side to that and limited amount of parking to the neighborhood. And so as we move forward, you will be seeing the same concept come forward in the GDP in the next stage. So if there's any discussion about flipping building back to the other way, or this orientation and discussion with staff made the most sense with how it impacts visibility on parking and how it works with the neighborhood. I get the point that's not on here, which is pedestrian access with walkways off the street.
Oh, you opened yourself up. Who wants to take
Better
a
now
run?
than next time before I do all the work.
Anybody have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I guess I'll ask one question first. Is it, I don't know if you've got a tenant in mind already, but is for it just says big box. Is this looking to have that entire footprint occupied by a single tenant, single use?
This is a speculative building with the possibility of this size. It is a template that's out there currently as a single user. with the gas station shown to the north, but the GDP will spell out other permitted uses and could be more buildings than this that breaks it up more. But I wanted to go to the most extreme case of what would be requested as a permitted use and make sure that kind of works with what guidelines and standards we put into the GDP. So there could be other options. This is speculative, just to show character and general guidelines that would be in the GDP.
Sure. Well, my gut reaction is that if the north face, the face of the building that faces north is the primary face, based on where the parking lot is that, and that's where we would have our entrances and our primary signage. Then I think initially this orientation makes some sense, because I could see the pedestrian connections maybe coming off of Bluegrass Drive, or in combination with Oak Opening Drive, and having a strong pedestrian connection near where Bluegrass Drive and Oak Opening Drive kind of connect there, to pull people from the neighborhoods directly into the front of the building without having to conflict too much with traffic. I guess I would also equally like to see that connection coming from the east again, with that other pedestrian connection to the eastern neighborhoods that we were originally talking to, so that there could be a similar connection. I like the idea that if people coming from Madison going south on US Highway 51, they're going to see the best side of the building as they're coming into Stoughton, which is always good. I would make sure that the south side of the building is attractive for people coming up to the development from the south, from Stoughton primary. But again, if I think you've got just a single face for primary entrances, I think this orientation might be the best compromise of accommodating vehicular traffic, pedestrian, and the whole works. So, and similar to what you got going on with your smaller building on 16. Again, we just really need to identify and think about where those pedestrian crossings will be and where the face is there.
I tend to agree with Commissioner Barman. I just want you to remember that buildings do have four sides, and people see all four sides of a building. And I think what everyone here wants to see are aesthetically pleasing, not just a brick wall with some vegetation shoved in front of it, something that's got a little interest, and something that doesn't look like it's an afterthought.
You know, if I could have a thing, just if the big box store or the big box footprint there on 17 does not end up being a single tenant, it might be kind of cool that on the west side of the building to have smaller retail spaces that would have storefronts or doors that would be along Oak Opening Drive there, primarily accessed even by pedestrians, or people could come down from the parking lot. Essentially, you have some smaller footprints along that side of the building, or even along the east and west side with the bigger box in the middle. Then you're not just creating an attractive side that might fake a storefront, but it actually would have an engaged smaller entrepreneur in those spaces.
All right. Any other thoughts from commissioners? I think this is good feedback. And did Bob, did you have something earlier?
Well, the only thing I wanted to mention, right now, lot 17 is just we have no placeholder yet for this particular parcel, but it's kind of a placeholder item as we figured our storm design and what we had to do to get to the point we're at now. We had to show something there to kind of get to this point, I guess. I just wanted to clarify.
As well as traffic too. So part of our TIA it's factoring in these uses as a way to quantify trip generation through here and how each of these major roads would function if they and what will be required at that. And that's one other note I wanted to make is we say potential roundabout at Rutland Town Line road and 51. That could be a signal. Currently in the DOT plans shows that only as a stop sign on Rutland down Town Line Road. With the interim roadway, that will change that mindset, I think. And so it's still on the table. It could be signal, it could be a roundabout. That's going to be worked out. And then the last comment I was going to make is, I don't think Bob would be opposed if the tunnel became part of this portion of the development. It hasn't been on the table. That obviously would have to be factored in how it connects, but I don't think there'll be a crossing across 51 at street level. So it'd only be if there's a tunnel that would make sense. And that conversation should be had with DOT. We would love to hear what that response would be if you could bring that up.
I think the biggest problem with a tunnel on this portion of 51 is the grades do not work out, and you'd actually have more maintenance for Stoughton streets department, you know, to make sure that that thing kept pumped out all the time, because you're going to end up with a big belly there. It'll end up like a pond because of the elevations. That's why Jeff from the DOT suggested to go 1,100-1,200 feet north of the Rutland Dunn intersection.
Well, I think that's something we should certainly do some further investigation, but that's a point well taken. Are there any other comments from the commissioners?
Sure, you could think about a bridge. Pedestrian bridge. You don't have to worry about your grade.
Code to allow mobile food vending on private property and to clarify regulations for general temporary outdoor sales regulations. I know Attorney Schneider's on the call. She's been doing a lot of work on this ordinance. Rodney, you want to start us off?
Sure. The Plan Commission will recall we had some draft concept discussions with the commission at the previous meeting. We formulated that into a staff recommended version is before you tonight to be considered and discussed as part of a public hearing. As the mayor introduced, Attorney Schneider is available and here to help us walk through that as you'd like as well.
No, we do have a need for a public hearing as well, but
big picture, food vending vehicle or how that needs to be done. At the last Plan Commission meeting, we essentially offered you two different puts in place requirements ready that saying with primary being how the permits get approved. There was one version which would have run all of the permits through the Plan Commission. The alternative was that mobile food vending permits can be approved by the zoning administrator. Was the consensus of the commission last time to bring forward for public hearing the version that is an administrative approval process so that you don't have to look at all of these when they come through. And then this also creates a separate temporary use category for mobile vending at special events. So it's a more limited permission that would apply only in connection with a special event. So is there anything specific you'd like me to touch on? Because that's a pretty high level overview of what's before you.
I guess I would like you to touch on one thing, just in anticipating the public hearing, if that's okay.
Yep.
Reading through the comments from all the pre-submitted feedback on this, the primary concern was the drive-through stipulation that is only found in the mobile food vending section of the three that you've created. It's not found in the special event section or the special food vending. It's not found in just the general vending. And so if you could just touch on why that is included there, whether it's from examples that you've gotten from other communities or concerns that you saw from a legal perspective, just so we can kind of anticipate the feedback that we're probably either going to have to address based on what's already been submitted or people who might be online.
Sure. Well, it wasn't a particular legal concern. I think that the issue was brought up and addressed because of concerns about potential safety issues that are associated with drive-throughs. I think something that's been an issue as we've worked through developing this ordinance is trying to develop an ordinance that applies to mobile vendors that are both sometimes rather stationary, but more commonly more transient. So if you think about the typical food cart, it's not a cart that sets up in one place for a long period of time, but moves from location to location, and is probably in many cases not in a location that makes a drive-through really a safe option. So I think that's where we are. The other thing I would point out as you think through whether to keep that in this version of the ordinance or to remove it or modify it in some way is drive-through is already considered its own land use under your zoning code. It's called in-vehicle sales, and it's a standalone commercial use unless it's connected with another principal use. If it's incidental to another principal use, then it's permitted as an accessory use. So I think if drive-through in some form is something that you would like to keep or allow for, then we should maybe consider an amendment to this that takes into account what that looks like, that is more explicit about what would be required in a site plan review to make sure that that kind of use is both allowed and works for whatever space where a particular cart may set up.
And I might add, just in addition, generally in vehicle sales that go through a conditional use process. So there is, as we most recently reviewed as part of Starbucks, there was a fairly iterative and deliberate discussion about safety in the drive-through aspects of that application. So it probably would be a more than an administrative review process that would be necessary.
That, and I would just say that because of how drive-through is currently defined and the regulations that apply to it under your current code, some of those might not make sense when you're talking about drive-through associated with a mobile cart. It's written right now assuming a fixed building. So there are requirements in there about curbs and things that might just not work or apply to a cart. And that's why I'm saying if drive-through is something you would like to consider, I think the amendment would need to create something almost new, specific for this situation.
Any other initial questions? You know, and for my part, you know, we started working on this ordinance in June of 2019 at our Community Affairs Council Policy Committee. So we were working on this before we really even had any requests from food cart operators. And then, you know, the CACP recognized that, you know, there were a lot of layers at that point, whether it was the clerk's office, the public safety, park and rec, and planning as well. So we decided to bring it here so we could kind of do everything, you know, under one umbrella. And that's kind of how we've evolved and come to this committee. And, you know, when we develop these ordinances, you know, we have to do them for all the businesses that want to, you know, apply for this type of permit. It's really hard to make it for a specific business because other businesses may come in and may want to have a drive-through as well, and it may or may not be appropriate based on their location, the type of business, and some, you know, other factors that we'd have to identify. So, you know, what we try to do is, you know, put something in front of you that, you know, takes as much as we can under consideration. And we have tried to make accommodations for the food cart operators that have come to us to have a permit issued, even though we didn't have an ordinance that really allowed it. So, you know, I think it's important to recognize, especially for the community, to know that we do appreciate, encourage the feedback, and we have tried to be business friendly through this process to all businesses. That would include food carts, brick and mortars, businesses that aren't even here yet. So when they come here, they'll have a clear expectation of what we will and will not allow. And, you know, it seems like some of this we're trying to make up on the fly, which it was really difficult to do. And I have to commend, you know, Rachel for her efforts to try to take the feedback and put that into an ordinance form, because it's been kind of a moving target here. So, you know, for my part, you know, I think we've done a lot of work to get to this point. Meeting, and then we'll reopen for the public hearing. I know there's at least one person signed up. There's a couple people, well, one person that's called in. Is there anyone that would like to speak at the public hearing?
I do not want to speak at the public hearing. This is Jean Legaki Alder, just listening in on this issue.
All right, I was wondering who caller number 2 was. And caller number 1 is Phil. So I guess the only person signed up to speak would be Phil Harrison. Phil, the floor is yours.
Thank you for hearing me tonight, commissioners. As going through this process, I've been involved in essentially every meeting that you all have for the last 6 months or more. I am very curious as to why everything is being worded and construed in a way, I guess, that is regulating something that we feel could be regulated well between mobile vendors and property owners. The other city attorney that was in previous meetings, along with Ms. Snyder, had made comment about how you can essentially add rules whenever you would like, and those rules would have to be abided by in the next permit. So essentially every 180 days, you would have to start following those new rules. We've been operating with a drive-through without any incidents whatsoever for almost 8 months now. Only once we reached out to the city to amend our permit from where we are currently parked to a few feet away so we would fit the natural traffic flow of the parking lot in anticipation of a new business coming into the old National Bank building, did it become an issue and be told that we were not supposed to be having a drive-through. And now in the next meeting, it was brought up that that was going to be part of the new mobile vending ordinance. I asked commissioners to consider the fact that with nothing having been an incident to this point, and knowing that you can add rules at any time, why are we regulating something before there's a problem? You have had many people, as I think Mayor said, over 50 people make comments opposing an outright ban to drive-throughs because there is a business in town that is operating currently. Whether the new ordinance is specifically targeting that business or not, it drastically affects that business. That business is roughly 90% drive-through business at this time. Taking away that drive-through ability and creating an ordinance that removes that will cripple a new small family business that gives back to the community, is at a point where we're about to start hiring and supporting employees and providing jobs to the community. And that may all go away. Thank you.
Any questions or comments from commissioners?
Rodney and Ms. Schneider, just for clarification, wasn't the line item about drive-throughs, that was in earlier versions of this particular ordinance drafts, wasn't it? It wasn't just added in the last few weeks.
No, that was added for this version.
Yep.
For the version that was before you at the last plan commission meeting. Is that right, Rodney? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah. And what precipitated that currently was the structural aspect of drive-through analysis for your CUP as it related to the Starbucks location. The commissioners took a strong evaluation of how that was going to function for a fixed location. And that certainly heightened the awareness of the commissioner's interest in evaluating drive-through facilities.
Yeah, and I would add that, I know, Mr. Harrison's frustrated, but like I said earlier, we have made accommodations. When they opened up their business, we didn't have an ordinance that even allowed it, but we issued a permit.
I also, Mr. Mayor, and sorry to cut you off, but I also don't believe that you had any ordinance that disallowed it either.
Well, yeah, if you're going to operate a business, you typically need a license, and a business owner should know that. We also, have worked with the applicant here on changing the ordinance for signage. And currently they're operating a drive-through that was not included in their site plan. And we haven't made a big deal out of it. And really we could have, and we really don't want to. And the difficult thing we're having here is, we don't know what this applicant will ask for next. And on this particular issue, as Director Shield pointed out, when we review a business that has a drive-through, whether it's Starbucks or Pizza Hut or a bank, they have to go through what I would say is a fairly rigorous process. And there's a fairly sizable expense to go through that process as well. For a brick and mortar business that pays property taxes, that at least helps offset our costs. We have to pay our attorneys to draft these ordinances. And in this particular case, we're being asked to basically, rubber stamp something without really any specific plan. And just say, well, it's working so far. And quite frankly, shouldn't be operating as a drive-through right now, is my understanding. So, you know, I guess it's up to the commissioners of what you want to do. Certainly we've tried to support this business as well as all the other businesses in town, especially during the COVID period. It's been very difficult for all businesses. And, you know, we'll continue to do that in a variety of ways. And certainly if you feel that changing the language on the ordinance is one of the ways we should do that, you know, that's ultimately going to be up to the city council based on a recommendation that comes from this body.
I guess I'd like to say one thing. And I, you know, have listened to Phil intently, and I read the statements from other city residents about the drive-through. And I've gone down to the site twice today just to kind of analyze things. And I hear Phil saying he doesn't have a problem at this time. There's not been a problem at this time. I guess I have a concern about when Starbucks does open up. And if Rise and Grind has, it looks like more than 2 cars, maybe 3 in line to get their drive up, there's going to be a blocking problem in that parking lot. And so that's my only concern. I'm not saying you can't get around that. I noticed that we had little cones set up, traffic cones, to direct the traffic. And possibly there could be a temporary cone set up to saying that, you know, do not block the Starbucks entrance or do not block the entrance to the facility, the other facility. And I don't know, you know, it's a dilemma, and I can see where it could be a dilemma, not just at the Rise and Grind, but in other areas of the city. So, you know, I want to support Phil and his business, but I also do not want to create a situation where we're just kicking ourselves down the road, something awful. That's all I have to say about it.
All right. I think I still have the
Mayor, do
public
you want to
hearing
keep,
open. So I'll close the public hearing, I guess. I should have done that earlier. And then reopen for the rest of our comments. Did you have something, Commissioner Barman?
yeah, I was going to suggest that we close the public hearing, and then I've got a few comments.
Go ahead.
Number one, I do appreciate the fact that there is a loyal clientele who is coming out in support of the current business in Pick and Save parking lot, and I appreciate that. But I also, you know, some of the letters actually were in somewhat raised red flags because they said we need a drive-through because the parking lot isn't safe and they're afraid to get out of their car. And so, I mean, clearly there is an issue with wanting to make sure that these kinds of uses, that not only the mobile vending, but the other kinds of vending is a safe situation. So I guess a couple things I might recommend is, number one, if as a commission we decide to send this to council with the stipulation that drive-through is not allowed, then in my opinion, it should not be allowed under all 3 instances. It should not be allowed as part of a special event food vendor, and it should not be allowed as part of another type of mobile vendor that's not food. Because I think if it's an issue in one place, it's going to be an issue in all 3. And just as an example, I wouldn't want to all of a sudden have it be that if we had Set in the Mai as a drive-through festival at Mant Park, and we had food vendors set up at Mant Park, and then as a community, we said, oh, it's okay if we do drive-through at those mobile food vendors for that event. So I think we need to be consistent across all three if we're gonna have it. Now, whether or not to have it or not, that's the bigger issue. My first gut reaction was that for 95% of mobile food vending or any kind of mobile vending situation, the site arrangement is not going to allow for a safe drive-through. It's just, I mean, it's like if we were to have a farmer's market and then you allowed people to also drive up to the farmer's market booth while people are also trying to have pedestrian access to it. It's not, you can't conceive of a way that that's going to be safe. You can't also allow a truck to come plowing through the middle of a farmer's market because they want to have drive-up access. And so I think we have to figure out how to do it. And if it's a matter of doing it as part of the site plan, then maybe that's the one instance where this comes back to commission. That if right now what's currently before us is that the site plan can be approved by staff. But maybe if the site plan entails a drive-through, then maybe that, under those instances, then it comes back to commission and we evaluate it like we do other drive-through instances for fixed buildings. Those are just some initial thoughts.
All right, any thoughts from other commissioners?
Todd, we were thinking the same thing. I was gonna say if there were a way that if a drive-through is to be considered in the vending, that would be the only instance that would kick it back into plan commission, so that we can take the due diligence of figuring out traffic safety, pedestrian safety, all of that sort of thing. So thanks for articulating that ahead of me.
No problem. I was anticipating your concerns.
Yeah, great minds think alike. Anybody else have any thoughts or suggestions?
I do have just a couple other thoughts. I talked about this quite a bit with my family, just getting their feedback on it. And one of the issues I think just is as Mr. Harrison, if I got that correct, I should probably be able to go on here and look for sure. Yet, right now, the majority of their business is drive up. And I can see instances where, from a site plan perspective, you might be able to come up with a design that could accommodate both drive up as well as walk up. But when you look at other instances of fixed buildings with the drive-through, they typically, the drive-through is for drive-up customers, not for walk-up customers, because it's not safe. You don't want people walking up to the McDonald's drive-through or walking up to the Dunkin' Donuts drive-through, because you're going to have people then standing in a traffic lane. The walk-up people have a separate way to access the services, and the drive-up people have a separate way of accessing the services. And I don't know if there's ways with mobile food vendors to be able to have one side of the cart for pedestrians and the other side of the cart for
drive-ups were allowed. Now, certainly this business model is unique.
Not what is essentially permanent approval. under permitted
First, it's
uses or conditional uses. So I caution against trying
self.
blurring those lines. I think there's a way that we could still try to get site plan approval
Well,
of a drive-through administratively and avoid that blurring of whether something is a special zoning exception. I guess we're walking into gray territory here where even pushing this through an administrative process, we can't promise you that it's completely exempt from Act 67's requirements. But what we were attempting to do was to make the approval process as ministerial as possible, to remove discretion, for the very reason of saying this is not a special exception, this is something different. And if you create something that
Well, I guess I'll kick this back to staff then, and just get staff feedback, and I know Rodney's on the line, about staff comfort level of having to now evaluate site plans to the extent of weighing the safety of drive-through. If it was drive-through only, if we required mobile food vendors to specify if they were going to be serving from a drive-through model or a pedestrian model, one or the other, rather than intermixing the two, and whether staff would start feeling like that's going a little bit above and beyond their comfort level to be having to evaluate the site plan to this extent.
I certainly think it brings in a lot more variables when you're looking at conceivably a temporary situation. Cones were mentioned earlier. What type of true protections are put in place with cones and painted, and how that conflicts with maybe painted lines that might be existing that provide access routing throughout a parking lot facility. So there's a fair amount of judgment that might be involved in a temporary drive-through facility. Whereas when you're dealing with a permanent drive-through facility, you're looking at structural alterations to the site that control and contain where the traffic can go and how it should go. So that's going to be more challenging for staff to feel comfortable evaluating each temporary situation.
Rachel, that a business owner would, if they were denied their temporary use permit, do they have an appeal process available to them or not?
I believe there's an appeal process for all temporary uses under your current zoning code. So this would fall into that same bucket. It's a temporary use.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or thoughts? So I guess what we have in front of us tonight is the proposed amendments to the zoning code. We've had the public hearing. Is anyone prepared to make a recommendation to the council?
I'll tell you, for me, based on the amount of feedback that we got from the public, but also just in light of some of the new information that we've received from staff and from legal counsel. I don't know if I might fit a mobile or drive up.
We should do something for COVID. You know, we've done some of the other things under the emergency order, but I don't think that's what, you know, I don't think that that's what this ordinance is all about. This is more of a permanent type ordinance. And certainly if COVID reared its ugly head or something else came along under an emergency order, we could certainly lift some of the restrictions. But, you know, at this point, we don't have anything in the code that really allows it. And in the meantime, you know, what do we say to the group that wants to operate a food cart here? You know, right now we have one, and, you know, others may want to join them, and we really don't have what I consider
so then I thought
an approval process. So that's what we're trying to get to.
thought about set to specify that it's
I mean, the other thing, you know, we could
either
do is, you know, we could either bring it back or we could send it to council without a recommendation, which would not be our usual, but certainly it's up to the commissioners of what you want to do on this one.
Personally, I'm torn between
drive up,
allowing to drive up and not allowing to drive up. And part of that is just being sensitive to the need
it can't be
of rise and grind rate. And
both.
It's I'm torn between the two. It seems that we could build a mechanism in that, and I hear Rachel and everyone here about,
because
you know, we're going to back ourselves into a corner here, and it's going to be hard getting out of.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Conflict.
I mean, maybe one thing if it was just an individual, but you know, this ordinance will cover any future carts as well. And they're all going to have different situations and considerations, but when it comes to having a drive-through, they may or may not want it. And it may or may not be appropriate. And that's what makes these things challenging.
Well, if the group considers tabling and not taking action tonight, you know, the current operator as well as has heard some of the comments from the group about the concerns about mixing drive-through traffic with pedestrian walk-up traffic, and the thought about having to put together
especially
a site plan that would show what a drive-through operation may look like. You know, maybe that would help facilitate your position on it going forward if you're not ready to take one now.
In a temporary.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to get some feedback so we know what to bring back.
I'm certainly for any mobile food car wanting a drive-through. They would have to submit a site plan showing how that works, and with the host like in the case of
situation where
Rise and Grind, we have a big site there. And with traffic flow being complicated
permanent street.
at best. And I'd want to see how or what they are saying they're willing
Structure.
to do to alleviate any safety concerns on that parking lot.
I guess just so I understand, Ronnie, are you saying that it might be helpful for us to have an example of what a site plan might look like and to have Rise present kind of an example of what their site plan would be? I don't, because we're not looking to approve it through commission because that's not the way we're designing the ordinance. I don't know.
That's what I was suggesting. I mean, it sounds like the commission is having trouble deliberating over what one may look like in a temporary setting. You know, there's been discussion about a conflict potentially with walk-up traffic versus drive-through traffic and how it may or may not interact with a cone system and existing parking stall configuration alike. So having an illustration that provides you some example might give you better insight as to whether you think it's something that should be administered with the staff level or should go through a commission or shouldn't be included at all.
Yeah, and I would kind of, compare it a little bit to the outdoor dining with the alcohol, and where Rachel's working on that one. You know, we're talking about having some removable barrier and physical devices that really create that separation for public safety, things like that. So it's just a clear case of where pedestrian, you know, we need to and should be and where they shouldn't be, and clear where cars are going to be and they're not going to be. And it's more than, you know, just a stripe on the ground or a cone. It's something a little bit more substantial than that, within reason, and just trying to understand, you know, what that might look like and how practical that would be.
I think something like that would be much more helpful, even though nothing has occurred in the existence of this drive-through with the mobile vendor. I don't want to wait
gladly.
Thanks, Phil.
So we'll work on that and I guess we'll continue the conversation next month. Anyone? All right, future agenda items. Do we have anything, Rodney, other than this issue? And of course, the
51 West,
will come back, yeah,
51 West items will be coming forward.
okay.
There's also a possibility that some of the Riverside, riverfront redevelopment brink project might be moving through the commission at that point as well.
Okay. All right, that's all we had for tonight. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you. Have a good night.